So in this video, I'm going to be showing you a few different types of increasing. So the first increase I'm going to show you is a knit front and back, which is abbreviated to KFB. So I've got my little sample here that I'm going to show you on. So let's knit our first stitch, as we usually would. And then this next stitch, I'm going to work our KFB, our knit front and back. So first step for this is we're going to go into it as we usually would knit a stitch. So I'm going from left to right through the front of the stitch, popping it on my other needle, and then doing yarn over. And then usually we'd slip that off our needle and slip it off this one too. This time I'm going to slip it off the needle, but I'm going to leave this loop on our left hand needle. So we've got a new stitch here, and then we've got our old one just here. So now we've got one stitch. So as we're increasing, I need to make another stitch. So we're making this one stitch into two. So we've done our first half, so we've knit through the front. Now I'm going to knit through the back of this stitch. So rather than going through the front, we're going through the back loop. And instead of going left to right, I'm going to go right to left. So working through this back loop here, I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go from right to left through that back loop, as so. And then same again, yarn around the needle, slip that stitch off, and this time I can slip that loop off my left hand needle. And that is how you do your KFB, your knit front and back. So we've got our one stitch here that would then create into two new stitches. So let's just show you that again with this next stitch. So going into it as we usually would, through the front of the work, yarn around the needle, then slipping that off the needle, but leaving the loop on our left hand needle. So that's the first half done. Now the second half, we're going to knit through the back of the stitch. So taking our needle and through the back and going from right to left, through that back loop, yarn around needle, slipping that off, and then slipping the loop off that left hand needle, and we've got our two stitches created from one. And that is how you do a knit front and back, which is abbreviated to a KFB. So the next increase I'm going to show you is an M1, which means to make one stitch. So this is making one stitch but not using any of our other stitches in the process. So like before, I'm going to knit this first stitch, as so, and now I'm ready to make my increase. So for an M1, you're actually going to work in this loop that's between our two stitches, and you're going to make a stitch out of this loop. So to do this, first thing you need to do is slip this loop onto our left hand needle so we can then knit into it. So I'm going to go from front to back, and I'm just going to slip this loop onto my needle. And now we're going to knit into this stitch, and this will become our new stitch. So to knit into this stitch, I'm going to go through the back loop of it. So we're knitting through the back loop of this to make it into our new stitch. So I'm taking my right hand needle and I'm just going through the back loop of it, and then yarn around the needle and just knitting it as we usually would. And that is how we create our M1. So let's do that again. So I'm going to knit this next stitch, and then I'm ready to make another M1. So working through this loop just here, I'm going to go from front to back and just slip this loop onto my needle. Now I'm going to knit through the back loop of this stitch. So taking my right hand needle, going from right to left, and just popping it through that back loop, and then yarn around a needle, knitting that stitch. And that is how we create an M1. So now I'm going to show you how to do those same increases but purling them. So rather than knitting them, we're going to purl them. So I'm on the wrong side of the work here, so on our purl side. And firstly, I'm going to show you how to purl front and back. So this will be abbreviated to PFB on your pattern. So just as before, I'm going to work the first stitch. So I'm going to purl that stitch. And now I'm ready to do my increase again. So we're doing the purl front and back. So same as like we did last time, I'm going to work this stitch first, but instead I'm going to purl it. So I'm going to purl the stitch, slipping it off, but again, not slipping this loop off the needle. So we're leaving this on the needle. So this is the first half of our purl front and back. So we've purled as we usually would through the front, and now we're going to go back into this loop and purl through the back of it. So taking our needle, I'm going from left to right and I'm going through the back loop. So left to right through the back loop, slipping that onto our needle, then yarn around the needle, slipping that stitch off and slipping the loop off this time. And now you've created your purl front and back. So we've made that one stitch into two. So let's do that again with this next stitch. So I'm going to work into it as I usually would for a purl stitch. So going from right to left through the front loop, yarn around the needle, slipping it off, but leaving this loop on our left hand needle. First half created. So now to work the bit where we go through the back of the work. So taking our needle, and we're going to go from left to right through the back loop of the stitch, yarn around the needle, slipping it off, and then slipping that loop off the left hand needle, creating one stitch into two, but working it purlwise. So now I'm going to show you how to M1 purlwise. So this will usually be abbreviated to M1P on your pattern. So I've got my work just here, and like the same as before, I'm just going to purl into this first stitch. And now we're ready to do our M1P. So just like we were for the knit one, we're going to work into this loop between the two stitches. So I'm going to take my left hand needle and I'm just going to slip it in below this loop from front to back. So just popping it through. And now this loop has been brought up onto our left hand needle. So we're ready to make this into a stitch. So just like we did on the M1 knitwise, we're going to work into it through the back loop, but purling it instead. So I'm taking my needle and I'm going from left to right through the back loop of this stitch, you see? So going in, left to right through the back loop, bringing that onto my other needle. And now yarn around the needle and just slipping that loop off, and our new stitch has been created. So let's just show you that again. So I'm just going to purl our next stitch, and now we're ready to do our next M1P. So you can see our loop between these two stitches here that we're going to work into. So taking my left hand needle, I'm just going to go in front to back through the loop and bring it onto my needle. Next step is to knit into this loop through the back loop of it, making it into a new stitch. So taking my right hand needle, going from left to right through the back loop, yarn around the needle, slipping it off, and our new stitch has been created. And that is how we work an M1 purlwise.